Rome, from republic to empire, the ultimate betrayal. For nearly 500 years, it was a monument to shared power. A single city-state that grew into a global superpower, governed not by a king, but by its citizens. The Roman Republic was an experiment in governance like never before, built on one sacred idea: no single man would ever hold absolute power. Its legions went out and conquered the known world, and its laws became the foundation for Western civilization. But a civilization isn't just conquered from the outside, it can be eaten away from within. In less than a single generation, this 500-year-old system would be brought to its knees, not by a foreign army, but by its own sons. This is the story of how two men, a brilliant general and his ambitious heir, took apart a republic that had stood for half a millennium. It's a story of ambition, bloody civil war and political genius, and how Julius Caesar and Augustus tore down the old world to build a new one in their own image. This is the story of the ultimate betrayal, one that saw a republic bleed out on the Senate floor, only to be reborn as the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. The cracks in the republic? So how does a republic that stood for centuries just fall? It wasn't a single event, but a slow, creeping rot that started long before the first sword was drawn in civil war. By the 1st century BCE, the republic's own success had become its greatest poison. Centuries of conquest funneled unimaginable wealth into Rome, but that river of gold flowed only into the hands of a powerful few. The traditional Roman farmer, the very backbone of the legions, would come home from long campaigns to find his land bought up by the super-rich, his family broke, and his place in society simply gone. This massive gap between the decadent elite and the impoverished masses created a society simmering with resentment. Political corruption became business as usual, as ambitious aristocrats used their fortunes to buy votes and rig elections, turning the government into a machine for personal profit. The institutions that had worked for the small city-state of Rome were now buckling under the strain of managing a vast, multicultural empire. The Senate, once a council of respected elders, had devolved into a battleground for feuding families and clashing egos. Political violence, once unthinkable, was now just another tool to settle a dispute. The Republic was a giant, powerful and glorious on the outside, but rotting from the inside. It was a powder keg of inequality and frustration, just waiting for a spark. And that spark was a man whose ambition was as big as the lands he had conquered for Rome. The man who would be king, the rise of Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar was a product of his time, but he would come to define it. Born into a noble but not especially powerful family, Caesar had a lethal combination of military genius, political cunning, and an ambition that knew no bounds. He saw the cracks in the Republic not as a danger, but as a ladder. Through a string of brilliant military victories in Gaul, he didn't just expand Rome's borders, he forged a battle-hardened army that was fiercely loyal to him, not the Senate. His victories made him a hero to the common people, who saw him as their champion against a corrupt aristocracy. But to the conservative senators, Caesar's popularity and his personal army were terrifying. They saw in him the ghost of a king, the very thing the Republic was created to prevent. In 49 BCE, their fear became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Senate, pushed by Caesar's rival, Pompey the Great, gave him an ultimatum: disband your army and return to Rome as a private citizen to face prosecution. For Caesar, this was a death sentence. He stood with his 13th legion at the banks of a small river in northern Italy, the Rubicon. To cross it with an army was an act of treason, an open declaration of war on his own country. In that moment, Caesar made a choice that changed history forever. He crossed the Rubicon, plunging the Republic into a devastating civil war. The ultimate betrayal had begun. The Ides of March, the ultimate betrayal. Caesar's civil war was fast and decisive. He chased Pompey's armies across the Mediterranean, crushing them in a series of brilliant battles. He returned to Rome not just as a victor, but as the undisputed master of the Roman world. The Senate, with little choice left, showered him with honors, eventually naming him Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. For the first time in centuries, one man held absolute power in Rome. Caesar launched a program of popular reforms. He sorted out the grain supply, fixed the city's crumbling infrastructure, and even reformed the calendar, giving us the system we still use today. By many measures, he was a benevolent and effective ruler. But for a powerful group of senators, his authority was an unforgivable crime. Calling themselves the Liberators, they believed the only way to restore freedom was to cut down the man who'd taken it. Their leader was Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar considered a dear friend, almost a son. On the Ides of March 44 BCE, they surrounded Caesar at a Senate meeting and stabbed him to death at the foot of a statue of his great rival Pompey. It was a brutal, personal, and shocking act. The assassins thought they had saved the Republic. In reality, they had just sealed its fate. They killed the man, but they had no plan for what came next, or for the power vacuum his death would rip open. The assassination wasn't the end of the crisis. It was the start of the final bloody chapter in the death of the Roman Republic. The heirs of Caesar, the power vacuum. Killing Caesar didn't save the Republic. It just unleashed pure chaos and a vicious new fight for power. The conspirators, led by Brutus and Cassius, had naively assumed that killing the tyrant would magically reset the system. They were dead wrong. The people of Rome who adored Caesar were horrified. At Caesar's public funeral, his loyal lieutenant Mark Antony delivered a masterful eulogy that turned public grief into a burning rage against the assassins. The liberators were forced to flee Rome as riots tore the city apart. Into this chaos stepped a player no one saw coming. When Caesar's will was read, it dropped a political bombshell. He had posthumously adopted his teenage grandnephew, a quiet and sickly young man named Gaius Octavius, making him his primary heir. At just 18 years old, Octavius, now calling himself Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, traveled to Rome to claim his dangerous inheritance. Nobody took him seriously. Antony, an experienced general, saw a boy he could use and discard. The great orator Cicero saw a pawn to play against Antony. They all catastrophically underestimated him. Possessing a cold, calculating political mind that rivaled Caesar's own genius, Octavian brilliantly navigated the treacherous landscape. He formed a tense alliance with Mark Antony and another of Caesar's generals, Marcus Lepidus. Together, they were the Second Triumvirate, a three-man dictatorship whose stated goal was to hunt down Caesar's assassins. Their real goal was to carve up the Roman world for themselves. Brothers in arms, rivals in power. The Second Triumvirate was an alliance born of convenience and sealed in blood. Their first act was to unleash the proscriptions, a wave of legalized murder targeting their political enemies and any wealthy citizens whose property they could seize to pay their armies. Thousands were executed, including the great orator Cicero, whose head and hands were famously nailed to the speaker's platform in the Roman Forum, a gruesome warning to anyone who dared oppose them. With their power in Rome secure, the triumvirs turned on the assassins. In 42 BCE, at the Battle of Philippi in Greece, the combined forces of Antony and Octavian crushed the armies of Brutus and Cassius. Both men took their own lives, and with them died the last real hope of the old Republican Guard. With their common enemy gone, the cracks in the triumvirate began to show. They split the Roman world. Antony took the rich and glamorous East, Lepidus was sidelined with Africa, and Octavian got the difficult but politically vital West, including Italy itself. It was a partnership destined to self-destruct. Antony, a great soldier but a clumsy politician, set up his base in Alexandria, where he famously began a political and romantic affair with the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. Back in Rome, Octavian played the long game. He presented himself as the guardian of Roman tradition, subtly painting Antony as a man who'd gone native, a decadent Eastern king under the spell of a foreign queen. He launched a brilliant propaganda campaign, framing the coming war not as another Roman civil war, but as a righteous crusade to save Rome from an Oriental threat. The final clash was inevitable. The two most powerful men in the world were on a collision course, and the fate of the Republic hung in the balance. The final war of the Republic, Actium. The rivalry between Octavian and Antony finally exploded from a war of words into all-out war. The final decisive battle for control of the Roman world would be fought not on land, but at sea. On September 2nd, 31 BCE, the massive fleets of Antony and Cleopatra met Octavian's navy, commanded by his brilliant admiral Marcus Agrippa, off the coast of Greece near Actium. Antony's ships were bigger and stronger, but Agrippa's were smaller, faster, and more maneuverable. The battle raged for hours. Then, for reasons historians still debate, something strange happened. Cleopatra suddenly ordered her squadron of 60 ships to break from the fight and flee toward Egypt. Mark Antony, seeing her leave, abandoned his men, his command, and his fleet, and followed her. Demoralized and leaderless, the rest of Antony's fleet was systematically destroyed or surrendered. The Battle of Actium was a complete disaster for Antony. Octavian pursued the couple to Egypt. As Octavian's legions closed in, Antony, told falsely that Cleopatra was already dead, took his own life. Cleopatra, after a final failed attempt to negotiate with Octavian, also chose suicide rather than be paraded through Rome in chains. The civil wars were finally over. After decades of bloodshed, the Roman world had a single, undisputed master. The Republic was dead. The architect of the empire, Augustus. With all his rivals gone, Octavian returned to Rome in 29 BCE as the sole ruler of an exhausted world. Everyone expected him to follow in Caesar's footsteps and declare himself dictator. But Octavian had learned from his great-uncle's fatal mistake. He knew that Romans would never openly accept a king. So, in 27 BCE, in a masterful piece of political theater, he went before the Senate and announced he was restoring the Republic. He claimed he was giving up his emergency powers and handing control back to the Senate and people of Rome. Of course, it was a beautifully crafted illusion. The grateful Senate, in turn, persuaded him to accept a collection of powers and a new name, Augustus, their evered one. He rejected titles like king or dictator, preferring to be called princeps, the first citizen. This was the beginning of the Principate, a system where the emperor held absolute power, but the familiar institutions of the Republic, the Senate, the consuls, the assemblies, were all kept in place to maintain the illusion. It was a disguised monarchy, a political masterstroke that let Augustus rule with total authority while claiming to be the restorer of the very republic he had destroyed. Over the next 40 years, Augustus would completely remake the Roman state. He created a professional army loyal only to him, established the Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor, and reformed the tax and government systems into an efficient machine that would run the empire for centuries. He hadn't just won the war, he had engineered the peace. Pax Romana, the empire's golden age. The ultimate result of Augustus's victory was the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. After nearly a century of brutal civil war, his reign kicked off an unprecedented 200-year period of peace and prosperity. With the frontiers secure and the seas cleared of pirates, trade boomed. The empire's population soared to an estimated 70 million people. Augustus launched a massive building program, famously boasting that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. He rebuilt 82 temples in a single year, became a patron for poets like Virgil and Horace, and passed laws to restore what he saw as traditional Roman moral values. This golden age was built on the ashes of the Republic. The peace that so many enjoyed was paid for with the blood of the civil wars. Augustus had solved the riddle that had cost Caesar his life, how one man could rule Rome without being killed for it. He did it with cunning, patience, and a genius for maintaining the fiction of a system he had personally dismantled. The ultimate betrayal of the Republic's founding principle, no one-man rule, led directly to the empire's greatest era of stability. The doors of the Temple of Janus, which stood open when Rome was at war, were closed multiple times during his reign, a powerful symbol that the chaos was over and a new world order had begun. So, how did two men bring a 500-year-old system crashing down? The truth is, the Republic was already dying. Decades of corruption, inequality, and institutional failure had left it hollow. Julius Caesar was the ruthless force of nature whose ambition finally pushed it over the edge. But it was his heir, Augustus, who was the true architect of the new world. Where Caesar was a hammer, Augustus was a surgeon. He understood that power is best wielded from the shadows, hidden behind a mask of tradition and legitimacy. He betrayed the very idea of the Republic to save the Roman state from itself, replacing a broken system of shared power with a stable, efficient autocracy. The transition from Republic to Empire was the ultimate betrayal, but maybe it was also unavoidable. It's a story of personal ambition and political necessity crashing together to end one era and begin another. In the end, the Romans traded their chaotic liberty for peace. They traded democracy for stable authoritarianism. And the world they built, the Pax Romana, became a cornerstone of Western civilization, a legacy built on the ruins of the very republic its founders swore to protect forever. The story of Rome is packed with epic tales of ambition and conflict. If you want to explore more of these pivotal moments in history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And let us know in the comments, was the peace of the empire a worthy price for the death of the Republic? Thanks for watching.